Welcome to this WiseOwl Report Builder tutorial. In this video we'll explain how to use report variables and group variables. So the video is all about using variables to reduce repetitive calculations in your reports. We'll start by explaining how to create a basic report variable and how to reference that variable in the expression builder. We'll then use report variables in expressions in the detail row of a table in order to reduce the number of times a particular value is calculated. And once we've done all that, the latter half of the video explains how to do the same thing by creating and referencing group variables. So let's get started. Here's an example of the type of thing we'll create in this video. This table shows a list of films along with their runtime in minutes, and we have a calculated column which compares the runtime for each film against the average runtime for all the films in the table. It's something we've done in previous videos, but the difference here is that we're only calculating the average runtime of all the films, once and once only for the entire report, by using a report variable. So this means that we can avoid having to recalculate the same value multiple times unnecessarily in the same report. A little later on in the video we'll show you how to use group variables as well, so here we've just grouped our films based on which genre the film belongs to. And we've created an extra calculated column which shows a comparison of the runtime in minutes for each film with the average runtime for all the films in the same group. But again, the idea here is that we're only calculating the average runtime for all the films in the same group once and once only. If you'd like to follow along with the video, you'll need a copy of the WiseOwl Movies database, and if you haven't got that installed already, you can use this video to help you get it set up, and you'll find a link in that video's description which you can use to download any files. Assuming you've done that part already, I'll head over to Report Builder where I've got a blank report waiting for me, and I'll right click on the Data Sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this Movies, use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then click the Build button to help me construct the connection string. I'll type in // as a shortcut to the local host, and then the name of the instance of SQL Server that I'm using, which is SQL 2017. I can then select my movies database from down towards the bottom of the dialog box, click OK a couple of times, and there's my data source created. Next I can create a data set, so I can right click on my movies data source and choose Add Dataset. I will call this one Films, and then I'll click the Query Designer button down at the bottom to help me select from the list of tables and columns. If I expand the Tables folder, I'm going to head to the Film table first, and from there I'll select the title and the runtime in minutes. And then from the Genre table, I'm just going to select all the fields, so I can tick the box next to the Genre table name, and that will give me the genre ID and the genre. I'll add a filter just to limit the number of rows I return for this example. I'm going to add a filter that will show only films with at least one Oscar win. So I'm going to select the Oscar wins field name, change the operator to is more than or equal to, and then type in the value 1 for the value. Having done that, I can click OK. My select statement will be generated, and then I can click OK again, and there's my data set. Now let's create a basic table to display those results. I'll just get rid of my placeholder title text box, and then I can right click into the page footer and choose to remove that. Then I'll right click into the report body and choose Insert Table. I'll assign the title and the runtime minutes fields to the first two columns. I'll just make sure that I can see all the text in the table. If often when you run the report for the first time, it doesn't actually display all the results. So you can see I'm missing some rows of data here. This little bug about the way the font is rendered. You can solve that fairly quickly by highlighting all the cells in the table and then choosing a different font. And if you wanted the original font, you could actually just switch back to that. And then when you run the report again, you should see that every row is actually represented. I'll just do some more tidying up. I'm going to change the column width of the title column, and then do a bit of very basic formatting for the header row just to make that stand out. I'll change the background colour and maybe make the header cells, the header font bold. And then having done that, a quick run of the report, and there's our basic table ready for use. Now let's create the basic version of the calculation that compares each film's runtime with the average runtime for all the films in the dataset. To do that, I can head back to the design view, and then I can right click into the empty column of the table and then choose expression. Ordinarily, of course, if you were creating a calculated column like this, you'd want to add it as a calculated field to the dataset. So you'd ordinarily right click the dataset name and choose add calculated field. But we can't reference aggregate functions in calculated fields, so we're forced into doing it in an ad hoc expression in the table itself. So I can right click that cell, choose expression, and then the first part of the expression I want to reference the runtime minutes field. So I can head to the fields list, double click runtime minutes, and I'd like to then subtract from that the average runtime for everything in the film's dataset. So I could either type in the name of the average function or head to the common functions aggregate category, double click the AVG function, head back to the fields list and double click runtime minutes. Now I also need to specify that I want to calculate the average over a different scope to the default scope. So the default scope is usually just the current scope. So that would mean that it would be calculating the average runtime for each film individually, which isn't of much use here. I want to type in a comma and then write in the name of the data set for the scope I want to use. So in some double quotes, I can type in the word films, close the double quotes, and then close the round brackets. That's what the final expression should look like. And having done that, I can click OK. And when I run the report, I'll get a new column of values showing the difference between each film's runtime and the average. So it's showing us that Dances with Wolves is roughly 46 minutes longer than average. Butch Cassidy is 23.5 minutes less than average. A bit of formatting would make this a lot more readable, of course. If I head back to the design view, I can quickly format this to 2 decimal places by selecting that cell and then in the Home tab of the ribbon choosing the number format. If I then run the report again, that makes it a little bit more readable. So this is fine, it works, we get the result we want. But the problem is that each individual film has to calculate the average runtime for all the films in the dataset, which isn't a particularly efficient way to go about things. So what we'll do next is use a report variable to make sure that the average runtime for all the films is calculated only once for the entire report. Just to demonstrate that report variables are calculated once and once only, I'd like to start with a slightly simpler example. I'm going to head back to the design view and I'm going to add a page header to the report. I can do this by right clicking into the dark grey area around the outside and choose add page header. And then in there I'm going to insert a couple of basic text boxes. To start with, I'm going to right click, insert a text box. And then in here I'm going to create an expression which calculates the date and time. So I'm going to right click into the text box, choose expression, and then from the common functions category, choose date and time, and then double click the now function. I need to close the set of round brackets. There are no parameters to the now function, so I don't have to fill anything in, but I do need to have the open and close round brackets. Having done that, I can click OK, and I'm just going to modify the font away from the default and then back to the default. And then if I run the report, we'll see a text box that shows me the date and time. Now, as I scroll between the different pages of the report, you'll see that the date and the time changes automatically. So this is being calculated individually each time a separate report page loads. It's calculated on demand. I'm going to head back to the design view and I'm going to create a variable that will calculate the time once and then reference that in a new text box in the page header. So let's right click again into the grey area around the outside of the report and we can choose report properties, and then on the dialog box which appears there's a variables page. In here we can add a variable. We'll need to give it a name. I'm going to call this one RV now, so RV short for report variable, and then for the value we can click the FX button at the right hand side to launch the expression builder. So report variables can simply contain expressions, much like any other expression you can write in Report Builder. All I'm going to do is head to the Common Functions category, choose Date and Time, double click the Now function, and then close the round brackets. So it's exactly the same expression that we wrote into the initial text box. If I then click OK, and click OK again, I'll insert a new text box into the page header. And then in here, I want to create an expression which references the value of that report variable. So I can right click into the text box and then choose expression. And then you'll find there's a variables category in the expression builder. And all I need to do to insert it is double click on its name. So the entire expression should look like so. If I then click OK, I'll just again do some basic formatting to make sure that the font actually appears. And then if I run the report, you'll see that initially on the first page there is exactly the same value between the now function and the variable which calculates the result of the now function. But if I scroll to the next page, you'll see while the initial text box changes, the second one doesn't. So each time I go to a different page, the report variable doesn't recalculate. So that demonstrates that report variables are calculated once for the entire report. And that means we can create a somewhat more efficient way to generate this comparison of runtime minutes values. So let's create a report variable which will hold the average runtime for all the films in the dataset. We can switch back to the design view and then right click away from the body of the report and choose report properties. On the variables page, we can then choose to add a new variable, and I'll call this one RV AVG runtime. I can then click the FX button to launch the expression builder, and I want to calculate the average runtime in minutes. Now what I'd ordinarily do is insert the average function and then select the runtime minutes field from the fields list. But of course this report variable doesn't have a reference to any dataset, so I can't see a list of fields for a linked dataset. So what I can do instead is head to the datasets list, find and double click the reference to the runtime minutes field. It'll be inserted with the sum function in front of it, but then I can simply change that to the AVG function and it's automatically applied the scope to the film's dataset. So the expression looks like the same as the one we created earlier on in the ad hoc expression. So I can then click OK again, and that's the report variable created. All I need to do now is replace my reference to the average function in my original ad hoc expression. So let's right click on that text box in the table and choose expression. And then rather than subtracting the average runtime minutes value, films, I'm going to take that part away and then head to my variables category and double click my new variable RV AVG runtime. So the expression itself isn't that much shorter, although the longer the expressions you store in the variables, the shorter your final expression will become. But the point here is that we're avoiding recalculating this value multiple times. The end result will be the same. If I click OK, I'll just remove my page header there as well, so that I see a little tidier version of the report. And then when I run it, we'll see the exact same end result, but we know it's being calculated a little more efficiently using the report variable. Report variables become more useful the more often you reference them. So let's create a couple of extra expressions that will reference that report variable. I'd like to create a column header for the difference between the runtime and the average, and then I'd like to add the average of all the runtimes to a footer row at the bottom of the table. So we'll create a column header which looks a little like this one, which contains the average runtime for all the films. Let's head back to the design view of the report and then we'll add the footer row to the table first. That's a slightly easier thing to do. I'll right click into the detail row of the table, choose insert row, outside group below. In the cell at the bottom of the runtime minutes column then, I'm going to right click, choose expression, simply head to the variables category and double click RV average runtime. Once I've done that, I can maybe apply the number format to that cell so it has just 2 decimal places. Type in a quick header to the left hand side of that, so average runtime for all films, and a quick bit of basic formatting there as well. Okay, and then to generate the column header here we need to do something a little more elaborate. I want to concatenate several things together, so compared to average of all and then the actual number stored in the report variable. So I need to create an expression into that header cell, and I'm going to start with some literal text compared to AVG of all, and then an open round bracket symbol followed by the closed double quotes. So that will be the first part of the string. I then want to concatenate the value of the report variable. So I can reference the report variable from the variables category and simply double click to insert it. Ideally, I'd like to have that variable's value formatted to 2 decimal places. So a simplistic way to do that would be to add the format function wrapped around the variable reference. So I can type in format, open some round brackets. We've done this sort of thing in previous videos, which is why I'm not explaining too much detail about this at the moment. But if you wanted to find these formatting functions, you can go to common functions and text, and there's a variety of format functions available there. So I'm going to say format variables average runtime value, followed by a comma, and then in some double quotes, 0.00, close the double quotes, and then close the round brackets. The final thing I need to do is concatenate the corresponding closed round bracket. So I'm going to add another ampersand, and then in some double quotes, a closed round bracket symbol. So the entire expression should look like so. All right, having done that, I can click OK. And then when I run the report again, I'll see I've got my report variable referenced and returning its value in this header cell. And also at the end of the entire table, the same value referenced there. But again, the important thing is that that value has been calculated only once for the entire report. Let's move on and look at group variables next. In order to do this, we'll need to apply some grouping to our table. So I'd like to arrange my table so that it's grouped by which genre the film belongs to. So I'll create an arrangement similar to the one shown here. So to make that work, I'm going to head back to the design view of the report, and I'm going to right click on the details group in the groups panel at the bottom of the screen and choose Add Group, Parent Group. I'll choose to group initially based on the genre field, and I'll add the group header and the group footer. I'm grouping on the genre field because that's the value I'd like to display, and that's the sorting I'd like to apply. I want my genres to be sorted alphabetically by their name. I'll click OK to generate the group initially, and then I'm going to just change the group expression for the genre group. So I'm going to right click on the genre group and then choose Group Properties. And on the first page of the dialog box, change from grouping on the genre to grouping on the genre ID. You may find better performance by grouping on a simple numeric value like an ID rather than on a long text description. So I'm just going to change that there, click OK, and then that's the basic grouping setup. I'll just rearrange some of the column headers here. I'm going to move the column headers for the 3 columns we had initially from the static header row of the entire table into the header row for the group. So I've selected those 3 cells. I can press Ctrl and C to copy and then Ctrl and V to paste. I'm then going to delete the top row of the table entirely. I shan't need that. Then I'm going to change the formatting of the genre cell and the cell sitting just below it to a different colour, just to make it stand out, and then change some font formatting properties there as well. And then a quick look at the results of that as it stands. And we've got our basic grouped table set up. Now let's create a group variable to calculate the average runtime in minutes for all the films in the same genre. To do that, we can head back to the design view, and then I can right click on the genre group in the groups panel, choose Group Properties, and then head over to the variables page, which is basically exactly the same as that for the report variables. We can click Add, we can create a name for the variable. I'm going to call this one GV, AVG runtime. So it almost matches the name of the previous one, it just starts with GV for group variable rather than RV for report variable. For the value, I can click the FX button on the right hand side to launch the expression builder. Because this variable does have a link to a dataset, you can see that you can insert the fields again from the fields list. So a simple way to enter this function or this expression is to type in AVG, open some round brackets, and then double click the runtime minutes field. There's no need to specify a scope here for the group variable. The group variables are automatically scoped to the group you're adding them to, so this will automatically calculate the average for all of the items in a single genre. I can then close the round brackets so that the entire expression looks like so. and then I can click OK and click OK again, and that's my group variable created. Let's now reference that group variable to display the average runtime for all the films in the genre in the group footer row. So I'm just going to click at the bottom of the runtime minutes column into that blank cell, right click and choose expression. Now it would be nice if I could just simply directly reference the group variable I've just created. However, unfortunately, as you can see, if I select the variables category, the group variable isn't displayed. Group variables don't get listed in the expression builder, somewhat annoyingly. So I can cheat a little bit here by double clicking on my report variable. And as I call my report variable and group variable almost exactly the same name apart from one single letter difference, I can just modify the RV to a GV, and then I've got my basic reference to my group variable. So if you need to type these out manually, it might be simplest to insert any existing report variable. You'll have the variables exclamation mark and then the dot value at the end, and all you would need to do then is modify the actual name of the variable. Anyway, having done that, if I were to click OK, I'm just going to apply the number format to that cell again, so it's formatted with 2 decimal places. And then I'll type in a quick title for that cell there as well. I'll say average 4. And then I want to put in the name of the genre, so I'm going to type in some square brackets and enter a reference to the genre field. I'll just do some basic formatting on there again to tidy that up and make it look a little different to the other cells. Have a quick run of the report, and then we should see the average for each genre sitting in the footer row at the bottom of each group. Let's create the extra column then, which will compare the film's runtime with the average runtime for the entire group. Back to the design view, I can add a new column to the right hand side of the table by right clicking at the top, choose insert column to the right. Then I can create an expression in the new detail cell which will subtract the average runtime for the group from the runtime for the film. So in the expression builder I can reference the runtime minutes field. I can then subtract from that the value of the group variable. And again, just to quickly cheat here, I'm going to insert the report variable called average runtime and then simply change the R to a G so it gives me the reference to the group variable instead. So that's the basic expression. Having done that, I can click OK. And I'll just make sure I've got the number format applied to that cell, so it's formatted with 2 decimal places. Have a quick look at the results, and there we go, a reference to the group variable. Slightly easier to do the mental arithmetic there. 120 minus 125 gives us -5. We can reference the group variable to create a column header similar to the one we created for this column as well. So let's head back to the design view. I can right click into the text box at the top of that column and choose expression. And I want to start the expression by referring to a piece of literal text. I want to say compared to AVG of, and then I want to reference the name of the genre that the group belongs to. So I'm going to close the double quotes there and type in an ampersand and then reference the genre field. After that, I'd like to concatenate a literal space and an open round bracket symbol and then close the double quotes. And then I want to concatenate the value of my group variable, but I want that to be formatted with 2 decimal places. So I'm going to use the format function, open some round brackets, head to the variables category and insert the report variable, change the letter R to the letter G. Then at the end of that, I'm going to type in a comma and in some double quotes, type in 0.00, and then close the double quotes and close the round brackets for the format function. And then finally another ampersand, and then in some double quotes, close the round brackets. So the entire expression is a little convoluted, but looks like so, if you wanted to follow the entire thing. Having done all that, if I now click OK, and then run the report again, we'll see a uniquely generated column header for each genre. You can of course create expressions which reference both report variables and group variables at the same time. So let's say that at the bottom of this column here we wanted to display the difference between the average for the genres films against the average for all the films. To do that, we can just subtract the value of the report variable from the value of the group variable. So back to the design view, we can right click into the cell at the bottom of that column, choose expression, and then head to the variables category and insert the report variable first, change it to reference the group variable by altering the R to a V, and then at the end of that we can subtract the value of the report variable. We can then click OK, and again I'll apply the number format to that to make sure that it's formatted with 2 decimal places. And then having done that, if I run the report, we've got the difference between the average for the group and the average for the entire table. The only thing we haven't done here compared to the example I showed at the beginning is added the formatting to highlight positive and negative numbers differently. This is something we've done in previous videos, of course, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with report or group variables, but I'm just going to quickly cover how to do it. But if you're not interested in conditional formatting, there's no need to watch along. So there's 2 things we need to do. First of all, there's a custom number format which shows the plus symbol in front of positive numbers and the negative symbol in front of negative numbers. And then there's a conditional format which changes the colour of the cell's font accordingly. So to do that, I'm going to head back to the design view of my report. And to create the custom number format first, I'm going to make sure I can see the properties window. So I can go to the View tab in the ribbon and tick the box next to Properties. I want to apply the format to multiple cells at the same time, so I'm just going to quickly select that block of 4 cells in the table and then find in the Properties window the Number Format property. Inside there I'm going to type in a format for the positive and the negative numbers, and custom number formats always begin with the positive format first. So I'm going to type in a plus symbol, 0.00, then a semicolon character to move on to the negative part of the custom number format, and type in minus 0.00. So it's a fairly simple one. Just zoom in there so you can see what it looks like. Plus 0.00, semicolon, minus 0.00. Having done that, if I were to quickly look at the results of the report, you'll see the positive plus symbol appears in front of positive numbers now. The conditional format is fairly straightforward then. I want to reference the value of the cell that the number is in, and if it's less than 0, make it one colour, otherwise make it a different colour. So back to the design view, and I want to highlight that same block of 4 cells again. This time in the Properties window I'm going to find the font colour, click on the drop down arrow next to the existing colour, and then choose Expression. What I want to do is reference or check if the value of the cell that the number is in is less than 0. So I'm going to use an if function to do that. I'll take away the existing colour and then type in equals IIF, open up some round brackets. Of course, you could always insert that from the common functions program flow category as well, if you prefer. The next thing I'd like to do is reference the value of the actual cell, which could be a little tricky because I've got 4 separate cells selected. So I'll use a quick little trick to reference whatever value, whatever cell the expression is sitting inside. So you can type in the word me, which is a shortcut, quite a cute little shortcut, to reference the cell that this expression belongs to. me.value, so specifically the content of the cell, the actual value stored in it, and I want to check if that is less than 0. Type in a comma, head over to the constants category and pick the colour you want to use to highlight negative numbers. I'll go for tomato, and then type in another comma and pick a different colour for how you'd like to highlight positive numbers. So I'm going to go with blue. I can then type in the closed round bracket symbol. The entire expression fairly straightforwardly looks like so. And then if I click OK and run the report, we'll end up with differently coloured cells according to whether it's positive or negative. So there we go, some basic examples using report variables and group variables. Hope you found some of that useful and interesting. Thanks for watching. See you next time.